Okay, guess who's back? Yes, Dapsy Chess is back, and it actually took the FIDE Grand Swiss and Women's Grand Swiss 2025 to bring me back. I just couldn't resist going over some of the games that I've been seeing, especially in this fifth round. The games I'm about to show. Three games very quickly. I'm about to show three games. These are the games where the big boys got offsetted. We have a game against Prague. Prague lost the game. The world champion Gukesh lost, and then Vincent Keymar from Germany, very strong, one of the top players in the world. Sad, but yes, they lost their respective games today on the fifth round. So I'm about to go through those games and let's just find out what really happened. And one of the, in fact, in Vincent Keimer's game that I saw, sometimes I wonder how very strong players, like I'm talking about 2,700 players, make some very, very elementary blunders. Okay, enough talk. Let's just try to see what happened in this game. So this is the first game I'm going to show us. It's a game between Bluebaum Matthias from Germany on the second board playing against Prague. Prague has been on the roll lately. I think he's won about two, three tournaments. I mean, I think he's number two or three in the world right now. Probably three or yeah, thereabout. So Prague has been on the roll. And one thing about Swiss tournament is anything can happen. Especially between 26, 27, anything can happen. The gap between all these big players are closing up because of the amount of material you have out there. And also if you're up to date with all of these openings, check all their games, you can really equip yourself to be in a position to score some very big upsets. So let's get right into this game. Um, Bluebaum Matthias was white with rating of 2671, playing against Prague of India, 2785. That's a big boy rating. His rating is 2785. Like I said, it's like I think about two or three in the world. So give start of the move d4. Prague played e6. c4 was played, your normal queen's pawn opening. Now I have never seen this bishop move. Never seen this bishop move. The first time when I saw this, I was like, this is a Burgundian. No, normally Burgundian, you start with the knight f6 and then bishop to b4 check. But I've never seen this move. When I checked, it said this is a kangaroo defense. Never heard of this defense. So bishop to c3, b4, and knight c3 blocks the check. Bishop takes, b takes c3. So, like I said, this is the first time I'm seeing this setup. But one thing about chess is no matter what the pawn structure tells you, you have to try to make something out of your pieces, where those pieces belong. So it captures on c3. F5 is played. Try to secure the square e4. Makes a lot of sense. You move, the knight come to f6. Your knight is going to move to f6. And I think it would be good to bring this bishop to b7 to put some pressure here because looking at this diagonal, bishop really has no hope of doing anything on that diagonal. So f5 is played here. We have e4. Immediately, white says, you know what, I'm not going to let you have that strong spot on that. So it immediately challenges it. f5, e4 is played. We have takes, queen g4, double attack. Attacking the pawn on e4, the pawn on g7. The bishop has been exchanged with the knight on c3. So we don't have a bishop on f8 defending g7. So queen to g4 was played. Queen e7 defends the pawn on g7. Queen takes e4, gets his pawn back. And one thing about White's position is he has the two bishops, which can be very useful for him, especially with a position that is about to get opened up very quickly. So we have knight f6, queen goes to c2. We have b6. I said earlier on, this bishop has to come to this diagonal because of the many pawns on the light squares. Trying to move this pawns, create a space for the bishop. It might be a lot of waste of time, but just bringing the bishop to the b7 square, very good move. Puts a lot of pressure on the long diagonal. So b6 is played here. We have knight to f3, bishop to b7, threatening to take on f3, double the pawns, and then white is just crushed pretty much. Bishop e2 defends the threat. We have d6. Of course, the idea of d6 is to keep an eye on the squares and also get the knight to d7. You don't want to move the knight to c6, blocking the bishop from this diagonal. So we have castles. We have knight b d7. We have bishop to e3, trying to get all those pieces in the game. Personally, I would have moved my bishop to g5 in this position, just, force him to make a move like this so that the square can be weak. But it says now I'm just going to go to bishop to e3. After bishop to e3, we have castles. We have knight to d2. What's the point of knight to d2? I think probably bishop to e4 might be an idea to exchange of this very strong bishop that keeps it out of this pawn on g2. And that could be an idea. Another idea of knight d2 is to stop the knight from jumping to either the square g4, because now the bishop looking at the g4 square. And another reason why the knight could have gone to d2 was because while he's trying to keep some more protection on the e4 square, put some pressure on the e4 square. So let's keep going. Knight to d2 is played. We have e5. It's a very logical, very, very logical move. You want to open up the position. You want to open up the position. But we've always been told if you have the bishop, open up the position. If you have the knight, close the position. But in this situation, I think e5 is actually necessary because you really want your pieces to have some space. Now, taking it will be very, very bad because now the square, c5 and the square, e5 is going to be a very huge square for the black pieces to put his pieces. And these pieces are going to suffer. Why? Because when this pawn is taken off, apart from the fact these two pawns are doubled, no connecting pawns on either side, the position is going to actually assume a blocked situation where it's actually very good for the person with the knight. Are you with me? I hope you're checking this out. So let's keep going. We have e5 is played. Rook a e1, beautiful move, logical move. And if you look at this position, all the pieces have been moved except the rook on a1. So rook a to e1, good move. Bringing the rook in an x-ray in front of the queen. So we have king h8, moving the king away from any possible checks on this diagonal, trying to keep the king safe. That's one thing you always have to keep an eye on. So let's keep going. We have bishop to e1. Now, bishop to d1, sorry. Making sure that we have more room to keep an eye on the queen on the e7 square. So we have rook a e8. Also, black brings in the last piece. You see, the last piece hasn't really been developed. Rook a to e8 is played. We have f4. White's pretty much saying, hey, black, you have to tell me what you're trying to do on this part of the board. And you want to take on d4. If you take on d4, I'm going to take on my pawn, on doubling my pawns. And if you take on f4, I'm going to take on my rook. Because I don't trust taking on the bishop, because the queen takes, rook takes, queen takes can be very, very nasty. So takes on f4, rook takes f4, queen to d f7, moving into another x-ray, moving to another x-ray attack on the f file. I mentioned this things because it's very important for you to keep an eye on those things. Although it's temporary, but you don't want to stay there for too long because you might get into trouble very quickly. So we have rook goes back to f1, and at this point the position is pretty much even. All black's pieces are looking good. Maybe not except the knight on d7 because you really don't have any squares to jump to. The bishop on b7 looking beautifully good, putting pressure on g2. The knight on f6 is looking good as well. I mean, he has an eye on the squares. Even they can't go to the squares right now, except for the one on h5. And the rooks are on very good files as well. So I think those are the only two open files. So spaces are looking good. Bishop d1 not looking so good. Bishop d1 is playing more of a defensive role, keeping an eye on this diagonal than an attacking role. Bishop e3 not looking so good, even though he's on a good square, but it's not really doing anything active. Probably just, it's an extra piece, but bishop on e3 not really doing anything active. So, rook e7 is played. Of course, the idea could be to double the rooks, put pressure on this bishop that we said is not doing anything. Queen to d3, trying to defend that bishop that we just said wasn't doing much. And of course, with queen to d3, there are possibilities of bringing the bishop to c to try to keep an eye on this on h7. It's a possibility. Rook doubles to e8. Bishop goes to e3. I think this move, white is pretty much saying, I want to exchange all pieces on the board. But I still think it's even, Black has a very solid pawn structure, solid pawn structure. We can't say that about white. White has this pawn structure. White has three pawn islands. Black has two. And in the end game, the more islands you have, the worse your position. You always have to remember that. So bishop to f2 pretty much says, let's exchange pieces. And there we go. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, bishop takes, knight goes to f8, trying to improve the placement of this knight. You know, I said earlier the knight on d7 wasn't really doing much. It doesn't have that square. You don't have the square. You can only go back to b8, which is not such a good move because if you come to a6, there is no other squares you can go to. And if you come to c6, you're coming to attack this pawn that is not defended. And if you try to get to a5, this pawn is defended twice. One, two. Even if you bring a third piece to defend the pawn, I can always get a third piece to defend the pawn. So getting the knight to any side on the queen side is just a waste of time. Bringing it to the king side makes a whole lot more sense. So knight f8 is played. We have queen to e3, threatening what we don't really know yet. It's probably trying to improve the placement of the pieces. Queen e3 is played. We have knight to g6. We have bishop to e3, keeping an eye on the dark squares around this position. And I don't know the next square the knight is going to jump to. Let's keep going. Queen d7. Queen can come to that square, putting pressure here, putting pressure here. You really can't do anything here because I have the bishop on d1. So queen d7, g4. There's a possibility, but you can't do that yet because, yes, you can. You only have one, he has two. So these are all the things you have to look out for whenever a move is made. So let's keep going. H3 is played. Interesting. Stops the occupation of the g4 square. It's very important to keep an eye on the move your opponent is making and try to make sure your opponent doesn't have any opportunity to exploit any of your weak points. This is very important, when we're playing the game of chess. So let's keep going. So we have queen to f5. Can you go to c2? No. Can you go to b1? No. Can you go to c2? No. Can you go to d3? No. Okay, I'm just going to say it's improving the position of the piece. I really don't see any square where this queen can infiltrate into the white position. So let's keep going. e4. Now, that's a very interesting move. Why do I say that? Now, the bishop is being blocked. By the bishop being blocked, there's a vacant square on the d4 square. So it's possible for us to get a knight to the d4 square. That'd be a very good opportunity because we can put pressure on the square, put a pressure on the square. We can get a knight on b5 to put pressure on the pawn on a7 and the pawn on c7. So d5, interesting move by white. But the engine said that wasn't such a good move. I said the other time, whenever a position is closed, the person on the knight always has an advantage. And at this point, black has a very, 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 very minute advantage. Is it enough to win? Not necessarily, but very minute advantage. Unless, of course, you're Magnus Carlsen. So we have d5. Immediately, the bishop relocated, changed locations. Like, okay, you know what? I have nothing I'm going to be able to do on the b7 square. Let's look to some other squares to create some play. Bishop to a6, putting pressure on the pawn on c2. We have a3, king to g7. Sorry, king to g8. Very important move. Based on the fact that we're getting into the end game, it's very important that this king starts to come to the middle of the board. Because in the game of chess, when you get to the end game, the more central your piece is, the more dominant the more central your king is, the more dominant your king can be. So there's a saying in chess when it comes to a very active king. We say it's an active king, central supremacy. So let's keep going. The king moves to g8. After king to g8, we have bishop to c2. Bishop to e2, sorry. Knight goes to e5, putting pressure on c4, and that's about it. We got to be careful to make moves like this. You have to be careful to make moves like this because you don't want any surprise on g4. So bishop takes, pawn takes, knight f3, putting pressure on the pawn on e5. Queen to e7, looking to exchange pieces. It says, I'm going to oblige you. Take on e5, take on c3. And this position is just even. That's one interesting thing about the game that was lost, at least of the two of these big boys. And I'm talking about Prag and Vincent Keymar. These games are pretty much even. Of course, until somebody just made a very big mistake and then lost the game. So at this point, the game is pretty much dead draw. So bishop d3 is played. Well, I'm going to say even because being even doesn't mean it's a draw. Because if you mess up, nothing you can do about that. Bishop d3 is played. We have b5. Now, the idea of the b5 is to try to exchange pawns. The fewer the pawns on the board, the easier it is to try to save the game or get a draw. Let me put it that way. So, pawn push, plays c5. Still an even position. Captures. Knight goes to c6, attacking the pawn on a7. Bishop goes to b7, attacking the knight. Takes the pawn. c6. Now, this is one thing I mentioned earlier. At this point, Black made a huge mistake, very big mistake. Prague just moved the pawn to c6 and immediately losing. After c6, I mean, White is just winning. Because by moving the pawn to c6, now number one, this bishop is ever going to be tied to the defend of this guy. Okay, that's number one. And number two, your bishop doesn't really have any movement. You can only go back and forth. Bishop to a8, b7. And white can just bring his king into the position. Bishop here is possible. Just bring the king, and it's really hard for black to stop that. So I don't know what Prag was thinking about when he moved the pawn to c6. And this was on move 36. Probably could be some time problems. So bishop to e4, immediately, very good move. The threat is just to take back, pawn push, whatever you do, pawn push wins the game. And the king is in a good position to stop any pawn that might try to, be sneaky and play fast on the white pieces. So bishop to e4 is played. Of course, you can't afford for him to take the knight. Knight moves back. We have bishop takes, gets another pawn, takes back. Now, let's look at this position. We have 2 pawns for the white pieces on the queen side against 1 for the black. We have 2 on the white side and 2 on the king side. So it's kind of even on the queen and the king side, but on the queen side, it's not because we have an extra pawn here. So for black to be able to stop this pawn, it needs to bring this king close to this position. And yeah, it needs to bring this king here. By bringing this king here, you're going to leave these 2 pawns, and they're going to come under some attack by the white king. So this is how the game continued. King f6, pawn push, king goes to e7, king to f2, king attacks the pawn, king f3. He says, okay, go get that pawn. I'm going to use that time to go put pressure on your pawn. So he plays g6. Of course, by playing g6, you created some holes where the king can just sneak in. So he plays h4, stopping the advance of the pawn on g5. At this point, I would have just played king f4, which the engine said was the best move. King f4, king g4. What's the idea? I'm just trying to sneak in here and grab this pawn and just push my pawn. But they said h4 was played here. And I think the idea of h4 is to discourage g5. And if you have to move this like this, once I take and my king take this pawn, is just going to go ahead and queen. So let's see how this game ended. h6 is played, and not the best move, but already a bad move by already a bad position by black. So h6 is played. We have king to g4. Now this is a very good idea. Pawn push. If you take, I take, and then I'm just going to queen. If you push past, I go in here and I capture your pawn, and I'm just winning. And of course, you cannot come here because I'm just going to push this pawn to win. And so this guy and these 2 pawns pretty much all these guys, whereby the king is just going to munch a bunch on this pawn, and the game is pretty much be over. So we have knight to d5. We have knight takes pawn check, king takes pawn. Knight comes to d4 check, king c5. Knight comes to c2. So it says, for you to capture this pawn, you have to come and harass this knight. Bring the king far away from these pawns, and then giving the king an opportunity to sneak in and get those pawns. So this is how the game ended. King to c4. We have king to f3. So for example, if you attack my knight, I think I can attack. Can I attack your knight? I don't know. Probably I can actually move my knight here. Yeah, move my knight here. If you can't take, and if you take, this is a pass, you got to worry about that. So let's keep going. King attacks the knight. Knight attacks exactly what I just said. Moves the king away. Exactly another attack on the knight. Moves the king away. King up. If you take that, my king is going to stroll in and cause some chaos on your side of the board. King takes, king move. Pawn push, king move. Pawn takes, king move. Knight, and at this point, resign, because if you do the knight here, I'm going to take here. I don't know where else you're going to go. If you go here, I'm going to just push the pawn, and I can just move the king here. I can move the knight here. I can push this pawn, check. I can come here. I'm going to push this pawn. I'm going to have a chance of pushing this pawn like that. And I think at this point, black is just dead. So this is the first game that I mentioned happened. This was the loss of Prague. You rarely see Prague losing a game. You rarely see Prague losing a game. Like I said, it's been on fire this year. So the next game we're going to go over real quickly is a game. I think this has to be the game of the round. This was a game between Mishra, Abimania, and Gukesh. Of course, Mishra, who is an Indian American, American Indian, whichever way, playing against the world champion Gukesh. I'm sure this game really hit Gukesh really, really bad. But Mishra plays so well in this game. So let's see how this game went. E4 is played. We have E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop to C4. The Guco piano, also called the Italian game. We have bishop to C5. We have D3, knight F6. We have bishop to G5. Not a very popular move, but of course a move that's been played several times. And I've seen Carona play the bishop to G5 move a couple of times. Bishop G5 is played. We have H6. Bishop goes to H4. We have H6. White castles. We have D6. Now, the reason why black is delaying the castle is in some variation. Black always wants to make this G5 move, force the bishop back, and then roll the pawns and try a very quick attack on this castled king. I've seen that happen a couple of times. And I think that's one of the reasons why black delays his castling. By moving the D6 pawn, we're going to get the bishop in the game. Queen can come in here, G5 can come, and bishop has to come there and just start rolling the pawns. So here we have C3. Of course, C3 is very important. Number one, you're trying to play D4, trying to get some control of the central squares. By playing C3, also make sure your queen can come to B3. You could also play B4. You have many possibilities with the move C3. This is not the time to move your knight to C3, but C3 on its own is the good one. Bishop goes to A7. We have knight BD2, gets the piece in the game. All these are very played. Now, this is what I was talking about. And G5, this is a very popular setup in the Guko piano. And this line has been played many, many, many times. So I'm sure it's not a surprise to both of these players. So here, Mishra just simply goes back to G3. I'm going to keep, get my bishop out of danger. And then he plays knight to H7. He plays knight to H7. When I check the database, it's probably one of the third moves. Interestingly, knight to H7 gave black a very good record in this line. So we don't really know where it went wrong for the world champion Gukesh. So knight to H7 is played. After knight to H7, we have D4. Anytime there's an attack on the flank, play strike in the center, even if you have to go up a pawn. And I think this pawn is, to me, it's not really a pawn sacrifice, because by the time it captures, knight captures. I mean, this king is right here. King one is coming. Pawn push is coming. There's just no way white is going to be able to save this position. Black will be able to save this position. But let's keep going. So we have H6. We have H5. So it's just ready to trap the bishop. So here, I saw this move. He took the pawn here. He plays H4. Sorry, he plays G4 here. He plays G4 here. I saw that move. Now, let me just break this down for some of us that might not understand the idea behind the piece sacrifice by Mishra. Mishra his king is castled, number one, right? He's developed all his pieces. All his pieces are looking good. We can't say the same thing for the black pieces. Rook is out of play, bishop is out of play, knight is out of play, rook is out of play. So pretty much have the bishop on A7, the knight on C6. There isn't looking has anything good doing. So white has all his pieces developed. And most importantly, for the black pieces, this king is in the center of the board. It's a red flag. The king is in the center of the board. So at this point, G4 was played. And actually, the best move in this position would have been the move H4. This is the move I thought it was going to play. H4 would have been the best move. So, but here G4 is played. I don't know if this was a slip or whatever. Of course, it just took on D6. It just takes on D6. I would have done the same thing. Give up the piece. You have like 4 pawns for a piece and an uncastled king with pieces that are scattered all over the board. I'm going to take that. So it takes on F3, takes on C7, queen moves. Queen, knight takes F3. Okay? It plays bishop to G4. H3 is played, get out of my territory. It goes bishop to E6. It plays bishop to... look at white's position. I don't know if this was a prepared line by Gukesh, or I don't know what Gukesh was thinking about when he found himself in this situation. I think Gukesh is just busted here. It's kind of hard for Gukesh to make any sense out of this position. So here, the queen moves, bishop takes e6, takes back. Now at this point, it plays e5. Not a bad move. But in the game, I actually thought about knight h4. What's the idea of knight h4? We want to come to f5. Why do you want to come to f5? Hello, I mean, g7 is there. Very nasty threat. Very, very nasty threat. With knight h4, we can't be worried about any double attack on this bishop thanks to the pawn on c7. So, pawn push is played. We have king to d7. We have knight to d4. That was a very bad move by Abene. That was a very bad move. What would have been a better move here? I think king h1 was suggested. I like king h1 is possible. a4 is possible also. b4 is possible also. I mean, you just you don't really have to do much here. Don't just push your pawns forward. Like I said, it has how many pawns for the piece? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 pawns for the piece with a compromised king. Come on, this has to be really, really super for the black for the white pieces. So here plays knight d4, captures back. The threat is pawn push. Of course, not going to let you do that. Queen to e and d5. Queen takes h5. Knight has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pawns to 1, 2, 3. This is just bad for white. I mean, for black, this is just bad. The computer said it's bad, but not as bad. Yeah, it could be worse, but not as bad. So knight goes, attacks the queen, queen check, queen has to block, has to take back. We have f4. Now let the pawn start working. f4 is played. We have pawn push. We have knight to d5. We have f5. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to try to open up the position. Ironically, after the move f5, this game is just even. Game is just even. We're human, so the game is just even. So f5 is played, takes back, takes. We have check. The king moves. Rook comes to bring in the rook into the game. The rooks are doubled on the f file. The king's not looking so good, but he has these two knights that's really giving it a lot of comfort. The knight that's making sure there are not going to be any checkmates either on the e7 square or the f6 square. So all of a sudden, it's not so bad. I mean, based on the engine, it is not so bad. So I don't know how sometimes, having such a big advantage and all of a sudden, it's gone. But I believe Mishra was like, whatever the case is, I'm going to make sure I drive this point home. So the game continued. Rook to G8, G4 starts to move the pawns. And this is one thing I always say: when you have your advantage are the 2 extra pawns. Start pushing it. If you get your king to a good square, just start pushing those pawns. Make your opponent be worried about those pawns. So knight goes to b5. We have rook goes to a7. Of course, the idea is to double the rooks on the 7th rank. And that's going to really put a lot of pressure on this king. So rook goes to g6. We have rook doubled. Not a good move here. I mean, it's interesting because rook h8 would have been a good move. Saying, I don't want to double here. Probably going to move with rook here. Rook takes. But I think if the pawns keeps disappearing, I think white is going to be better. I think white is going to be better. So here I plays rook to g6, bad move. Rook here, bad move. What really I've played in this point? Rook to d1 is a very good move. Rook to d1 is a very good move. Because the threat, what's going to be the threat of rook to d1? Would this be a threat? I don't think so. This is not going to be a threat. Rook to d1 is a good move. But anyway, it plays rook to f7. It's human. So humans don't see engine moves unless you're Magnus Carlsen. Rook goes to d7. We have rook trying to exchange the pieces. He said, no, I don't want to do that. He said, I'm going to take your pawn. So that's fine. I'm going to play a4. I'm going to try to dislodge your knight from this very strong square. Because if you don't have your knights close to this position, I can have some chances. So here it plays knight to d4. Bishop to c4, attacking the knight. He says check. He attacks the knight. He moves the knight to f4. And white is just winning by 3 points. Bishop d4. Very good move. And what's the threat? Checkmate. Boom. Checkmate in the middle of the board. This is where sacrifices will have to be made. Rook check on f3. We have king goes to e1. Knight check on d3. King goes to 2. Knight takes, no more checkmate. It takes, check, moves, gets his piece back. But it still has 2 extra pawns, very dangerous pawns. Okay? At this point, this is just +4. So let's keep going. We have rook attacks the pawn, check, king move, check again, king move, check again, king move, just testing him to see what it's going to do. Rook comes to d3. Now, the idea of rook d3 is pretty much to shield this rook away so that this king can actually get into this position. Like I said earlier on, when you get to the end game, you want to make sure your king has a lot of squares you can move to. So it takes the pawn check, king goes to king goes to c1. I'm surprised. I would have expected the king to move to the square e3. So it goes to c1, getting tempo of the rook. So he plays rook to h2, pushes the pawn to g5. King attacks the pawn, check, king moves, check again, king moves. Rook comes all the way to d2. Now, if rook takes, king takes, just winning. Because I'm just going to bring my king here. I ain't going to have to worry about this pawn. And for example, if you bring the king here, I can just bring my rook here. Bring my rook here, defending the pawns. You can't do anything about that. So this is not the time to exchange pieces. Rook check, king moves. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Defend the pawn here, defend the pawn there. So the king is free to move. This rook is also free to give any kind of checks or any kind of harassment on the black pieces. So let's keep going. So we have rook all the way down. Rook check, king move, pawn push. We're making progress here. Rook comes to h4, attacking pawn on a4. Rook goes to f7. The idea is just to push the pawn, rook and get a queen. So for example, if it takes the pawn here, I'm going to push this pawn. Even if you bring the rook back attacking, I'm going to bring the rook here, attacking your rook. And if you take, I'm going to get a queen, and I'm just winning. So you don't have time for that. Pawn push, takes back, pawn push. Now we're threatening rook goes back here, right? So it says rook check, king moves, rook check, king moves. And at this point was the time when Gukesh stretched out his hand and said, "Good game, Mishra." I mean, this would have really hurt Gukesh. Really hurt Gukesh. A tough loss for Gukesh. And lastly, one more game I want to check out before we stop this is the game against Maurizi Macandrea versus Keymar. Another careless loss by Keymar. They got into an end game where we have 2 bishops. I mean, 1 bishop each, 3 pawns against 2, but it's just even. Nothing to be done until the 27. What's Vincent's rating? The 2751 GM from Germany make a horrible. Then move them pawn to f6. So let's see how this game went. E4 is played, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes, knight takes d4, knight f6, bishop to d3. These are some of the side lines in the national. Bishop to d3, just trying to keep it simple. Bishop to d3 is played, knight to c3, bishop to e3. Very, these are the things like some beginners would play, like people that are just learning the chess, just normal developments, normal moves. So knight goes to g4, knight takes c3, knight takes c6, sorry. Pawn takes c3. Bishop goes back to d2, says, well, let me just get my bishop back. I was thinking in this game, why didn't he hit him with this queen b6 move? I think, what on queen b6? After queen b6, I think he can just castle. And if you take the pawn, you can play bishop here. And if you move back, I think, I don't know. I don't know that pawn sacrifice, but I don't know. But anyway, he didn't take it. He didn't try to find out what's going to happen if he goes for the double attack. I mean, queen b6 is attacking f2 and b2. He didn't go for that. So after the move, bishop to d2, we have actually there's a game here, queen b6. After the move, queen b6, it was a 1 position for white. I wonder how that game turned. It was a 1 position for white. So here I plays rook to b8. Just castles, like, hey, you want to get the pawn, go ahead. That pawn has been yours ever since, so I'm not even worried about that pawn. So at this point, this is a very, very fresh position. There is nothing about this position seen in the database, at least in the database I have. So castles. So let's make a very quick recap about this position. White is castled. He has all his mana pieces developed except the knight on b1. Black is yet to castle. He has only one of his minor pieces developed. The bishop on c8 and f8 not doing anything yet. The pawn on e7 still blocking the bishop in. So is the pawn on g7. So it's a little behind in development here. Block is 2751. Vincent Keymar from Germany. And Maurizi Marcandrea, a French GM 2610. He's trying to make this 2750 Super GM, work for his money. So here I plays e5. Very interesting move, e5. I don't know why e5. Of course, probably trying to get the bishop to e6, trying to make sure, put on clamp on some of these dark squares here. So after the move e5, b3 is played. And the idea of b3, I think, is just to get rid of the pressure on the b2. Of course, c4 is going to be played at some point with the idea of knight to c3. So let's see how this game continues. Bishop to e7, c4 is played, making sure that there's a clamp on the d5 square. So we have castles, knight c3, bishop to e6, h3. The knight has been there for too long. So let's force the knight to move back. So knight goes to f6, queen to e2. I probably would have played bishop e3 here. What's the idea of bishop? Is just putting pressure here. But queen to e2, nothing wrong with that. Actually, the engine said bishop e3 was the best move. So queen to e2 is played. So we have knight to d7. What's the point of knight d7? Knight d7 is a very popular maneuver in the Sicilian. The idea of knight d7 most of the time is to try to get the knight to c5 and also to try to vacate the f6 square for the bishop. These are possibilities, things that can happen this point. But most importantly, the knight is going to try to come to c5, putting pressure on the bishop on d3. I'm going to try to run this pawn down to hit on this pawn here, try to make this pawn a weakness so I can attack this pawn as many times as possible. But white doesn't have to be worried about that because he can simply move this bishop to c2 to defend the pawn, maybe get to rook to b1 if he has to also defend the pawn. So after the move knight d7, there's rook to d1, rook a d1, putting an extra attack on the queen on d8. So we have knight c5, he plays bishop to c2, we have a4, a5, f4. Now, white starts an active play. What do I mean by active play? It's actually when you throw your pawns forward to actually meet up with the other person's pawns. And the idea of doing that is to open up more position. You want to open up the position. Get your pieces more opportunity to get into the position of your opponent. Immediately the f6, push is in this position, f6, f5 is a very strong threat. That pawn can just cause a whole lot of havoc. So here you can't afford to let it get there. So it takes. Actually, queen b6 would have been a better move. Setting up a very deadly disc. Of course, I'm just going to step aside. I don't know if I should go to h1 or go to h2, but I think I want to go to h1. I don't have to worry about knight coming to that square. The knight is on c5. So I think king h1 is a safer square for the king. I don't want to come to h2 because I can get easily exposed, with this diagonal. So here it takes. Bishop takes. Now there's pressure on d6. We have a4. We have e5. Now it's very logical for black to try to create some play on the queen side. Like I said earlier, knight is going to come to c5, put pressure on the pawn on b3, create some kind of weaknesses. Now why don't you just move this pawn to e5? Now thanks to the rook on d1, this pawn cannot be taken. So even if white loses the pawn on the b3 pawn, black has to be very careful because these bishops, they are looking straight to the black king, couple of the queen, couple of the rook. So this black king can come under heavy fire very, very quickly. So take on b3, take on b3 back with the pawn, pawn push. It says, well, I don't want to take back. I'm just going to push the pawn. Well, it moves queen to f3, putting some more pressure on the pawn on d5. Takes on b3, takes on d5, takes it to the pawn, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, queen moves away. It's a check. Now let's just check out this position real quickly. Same number of pawns. It's kind of even. 2 pawn islands for white, 1 for black. Yes, white has the bishop here, but bishop here wouldn't be such a big deal when there is play on just one side of the board. If there were plays on both sides of the board, that means there are some pawns on one side, the king side and the queen side, then the bishop here might make some sense. But if you have all the play on one side of the board, you should not be worried about the bishop here. So looking at this position, I think the best any of them can get is a draw. And at this point, the computer analysis is going to say plus 0.2. So that's very minimal, not enough to win the game. But guess what? Our 2751 Super GM still found a way to lose this game. King h2 is played here. We have knight to d4. Bishop takes check. Okay, takes queen check. King move, queen takes. Even with this position, white is a pawn up. Right? White is a pawn up. Still even. Still roughly even. Very slight advantage for white. So rook comes to d8. Still a sense. In position like just exchange all the pieces. Exchange all the pieces. Rook to f3. Queen goes to queen goes to e6, takes, queen check, king moves, rook comes to c3, and the idea to go to c6, queen exchanges, take, rook check, rook goes back, rook takes. This is even. They're not far away from shaking that good game. I don't know. Something tells me probably the Super GM declined the draw file. But why would you decline a draw file if you're going down? Or maybe there was never any a draw file. We never can tell. So the game continued. King G3, right? Um, G6. I like this move. Why do I like this move? When you're in an end game, you have a certain colored bishop. Put your pawns on the opposite color of that bishop, so that pawns don't hinder your bishop, right? For example, the pawn on D4 on E5 is hindering this bishop a little bit. So put your pawns on the light square. So your bishop takes out the other. Put your pawns on the light squares here. Put your bishop. Yeah, let your bishop. That's your bishop roam the dark squares. So even the thing is even here, right? There we go, the blunder. I mean, like in one move. So I was thinking to myself, what could he have made this? So when I checked the time, he actually had like 1 minute more to make 3 moves. But if you don't have nothing to say, make a king move. Let the pawns, this pawn cannot move, you're going to exchange it all. Make a king move. This pawn cannot move, you're going to exchange it all. This pawn can't get anywhere either because you have the bishop waiting for it and the king. You know what? I'm here analyzing, and yeah, it's easy to analyze and see all this, but when you're playing, it's a different ball game. But you don't just expect super GMs to make such mistake. I think it's just a very elementary mistake. After the move f6, it was just totally low, +7, e6. Now the problem here, this king can only come through that square. And this is the thing: if you exchange up the two bishop, white is just winning because that's an extra pawn. And bishop is going to come to d6, making sure this king can get close enough. And that's exactly what happened in this game. King goes to f8. We have king g4. He says, hey, guy, you just made a blunder. Well, let me just give you back that blunder. King g4. Yes, he's trying to play a move like this. Very bad move. His opponent just implemented him by giving the blunder. But what should I play? Bishop check. I just said that. You don't want this king to come here. The idea of bishop check, if bishop comes here, just move your bishop back to c7. So the bishop can't go back here, and the bishop moves away. Bring your bishop here to d8, attacking the pawn. And yeah, black is just in trouble here. So he plays king g4, not the best move. White plays bishop to um, king to e7. Another very bad move. Just played h5. Pawn takes, protects the pawn. This is the most important pawn. If your king takes this pawn, it's just a draw. It protects this pawn. This is a weakness. I was saying this earlier on. Your pawns will have looked lovely if they were on f7 or g6. With the pawn on f6, your bishop would have to always find a way to defend this pawn. Your king will always have to find a way to defend this pawn. And with the minimal space you have to maneuver, it's about time. I mean, it's just going to take time before your king actually gets away from protecting this pawn. You lose this pawn wins the game. So here, this is what happened. Bishop goes to a5. We have bishop to e3, threatening bishop to d4, winning the pawn on f6. He says, no, I don't want you to do that. He said, I'm going to check you. I want you to move back. You too close, get away from my pawn. He said, I'm going to move back. He said, I'm going to move my king to g6. Let me snap this pawn off the board. This pawn is being here, not doing much. Let me know I have 2 pawns up. He says, well, you have to work for that pawn. He pushes the pawn to h4. Brings the bishop to hf to attack on the pawn. Bishop goes to b2, takes the pawn off the board. King comes back to e7. King f5 protects the pawn. Now, all white needs to do is to put the black position in a zwang and just win the game. Pretty much make sure that any move black makes, black is losing. And white was able to achieve that. How? It went for this maneuver. Bishop to e1. It has bishop to b2. Bishop check. The king has to move. Now I place bishop to c5, bishop to c3. Now, the reason why I keep staying on this diagonal is because if you move away from this diagonal, I'm going to move here and capture that pawn. So he has bishop to c3 here. Now he has bishop to e3. We have king to e7. Bishop goes to h6. He's trying to make sure that when he makes this pawn move, when he makes this bishop move, and he's threatening to do this, he can always push this pawn all the way. Because anytime I take, I'm going to take, I'm going to come back and stop the pawn and win with this king pawn. So this is what happened. Bishop goes to e1, attacks the pawn. Bishop defends the pawn. Bishop goes down. Bishop goes to g5, g3. So now if you move this bishop away, I'm going to take the pawn. You cannot move the bishop to h4 thanks to my pawn on g3. And you can't move this king away because I'm just going to win this pawn and win the game. And after that move, Vincent Keymar resigned. Three very interesting moves where the super GMs made some very elementary blunders and then lost the game. So, like I've said this in the past, when I see games like this, it gives us hope that, anything can happen. Just keep hanging in there. And like I said, it's been a while I've been here. I mean, you actually have to take this filigree series to bring me out. But of course, I'm going to do more games. And also, I want you all to know that we have our representative from Nigeria, Tennessee. He's really having a tough tournament. And I think it's going to just be an experience for him. And of course, we have Basim, our number one rated player in Africa, not doing so well. And if you notice, I don't think he's been really active lately. One thing about chess is you have to stay with it. Chess is a very jealous game. If you move away from chess for too long, chess is going to move away from you. Okay, that's about it for now. It's nice to see everyone. So much has happened, and I think in my other videos, I'm going to try to share some of the things I've been going through and things that have been going really good, I have to say, and I thank God for that. All right, see you all soon. Take care. God bless. Bye for now.